Welcome to No Man's an Island, a podcast powered by Men's Therapy Hub, a directory of male therapists for male clients. And breathe, Chris. I am incredibly proud to say that this is episode 1 of the podcast and also day 1 of Men's Therapy Hub's public launch week. It has been one heck of a journey to get to this point. My name's Chris Hemmings, and I'm one of the co-hosts of this podcast. The other host is Dr. Jett Stone, and he's actually the guest on today's show. We figured if we're going to ask others to share their stories, it was only appropriate that we share ours too. So before we do that, I do just want to explain a little bit about how we got to this point. I started training as a therapist back in 2020. On my foundation course, I was one of 3 men out of a class of 18. Then, on my postgrad, I was one of 3 men who graduated out of a cohort of 24. In the years before that, I'd been studying men's mental health and masculinity as a journalist, and so already had a specific focus on it with my life and my work. My experiences on my 2 courses kind of cemented my belief that men aren't being properly served by the psychological professions. And that is, in part, what this podcast is going to be about. It's also, in very big part, what Men's Therapy Hub is about. So in February 2024, I read an article by a guy called Jett Stone, and it was called, "Why is it so hard to find a male therapist?" I felt compelled to reach out to him because it spoke to so much of what I was experiencing. Jett and I met online. I was in London, he was in New York, and had a great conversation about all things men's mental health, and we discussed the possibility of one day setting up a men's therapy network or advocacy group. We ended the call with a wish that one day we might work together on a project like that. I then started to discover some alarming statistics because even though I was no longer a journalist anymore, the journalist in me was still interested in understanding what was going on. Statistics such as in the UK, only 20% of therapists are male. Fewer than a third of therapy clients are male. And the big one for me is that men drop out of therapy at an alarmingly high rate. So clearly something isn't working for men in terms of the therapeutic profession. Then in November 24, I had an idea. Why not create a therapy directory that is by men for men to show men that there are men out there who want to work with them, a man. And so I started the process of creating Men's Therapy Hub. I messaged Jett, and now the UK site is launching today, November 3rd, 2025. The US site will follow suit in early 26. We already have 160 male therapists signed up and ready to go in the UK. But we're more than just a directory. We have therapists writing for our Voices section, we have this podcast, and most importantly, I think, we're donating 10% of subscriptions to men's mental health charities, non-profit organizations. The 4 episodes we're releasing this week, as well as this one, are with the heads of the charities we're supporting in the UK. The US ones will follow. And then next week's episode will be Jett interviewing me. You didn't think I was going to get away with it, did you? And so here we are, No Man's an Island, because we all need help, whether it be with our personal growth, advocating for others, or definitely launching a new business. So thank you for all being here, and thank you most of all to Jett for agreeing to support me on this mad journey that we're about to embark upon together. So welcome, Jett. Thank you for agreeing to help me. It's been incredible to have someone to bounce off. But the first question, as always, to everybody on this podcast is going to be, how did you get into this space?
Well, first off, wonderful introduction, and meeting you changed my life a lot because I found someone who was on a similar track with a similar ambition, similar passion for this work that I have. And kudos to you for launching Men's Therapy Hub. I'm honored to be along the ride on this journey. I think it's the coolest thing. And I'm really excited to move this project ahead. I'm sure we'll talk more about it later, but masterful job launching this whole thing. I'm really
Thank you, Jett.
proud of you. I think it's awesome. How did I get into this work? Well, there's professional reasons, there's personal reasons. I'll weave in the 2 of them. You know, I grew up in the Midwest in the Chicagoland area, and I pretty much grew up in locker rooms, ice hockey locker rooms. And I was around a lot of boys and coaches in the form of men who just exhibited so many different forms of masculinity, what some might call traditional masculinity. There's so much anger in the room. There was so much pride. There was so much joy. It was a hodgepodge of feelings and emotions. And I think there's a part of me that got along with the rough and tumble crowd. It's a very physical sport. There's a lot of joking, a lot of um, playing under pain. One of the biggest things you could do to earn your stripes was to, get your teeth knocked out and still play, break your nose, still play, bleed, get down, get back up. And those were all actually positive things for me in many ways. They built a lot of resilience, but I always had this other side to me. Sometimes I like to call it like the poet side. I was literally writing like songs, quietly in the corner of the room. Like I felt like I fit in, but I didn't really fit in. I wanted to know more about who my teammates were, who my coaches were, who my dad was. Honestly, my dad was a very um, cool, calm, collected, unemotional brand of masculinity. And so I had a lot of curiosity what lived beneath the surface of these male archetypes that I was living amidst. And so that just kind of, I didn't know I was going to go into working in men's mental health at that point in my childhood, but that was kind of the start of it. There was a lot of curiosity. I wanted to lift the hood of who these people really were. I wasn't often getting it from them, including my dad. I wanted to know more. So fast forward, many years later, I'm in college and I'm an English major. Unfortunately, to my parents' chagrin, that well, at least my dad, wanting me to go into medicine. So I moved in reading the great novels and books and reading literature and writing essays and thinking about the humanities in that way. And to me, there's no greater psychologist than authors in many ways. And I didn't know I was going to be a psychologist at that time. And I moved to New York City for journalism school, actually. So that's where some of our paths crossed there, Chris. And in journalism school, I got very interested I was working in a borough, Greenpoint, Brooklyn, got very interested in the people there, the businesses, and I was taking a psychological bent on a lot of it. I started also working at Psychology Today at that point. And I was interviewing psychologists, was interviewing researchers, and sitting on the subway and looking across from somebody and saying, like, where are they going? I want to know what they're thinking. I want to know how they feel. I had an insatiable appetite to know someone's story. Yes, there was a part of me that wanted to help. And as a journalist, or as a training journalist, I should say, there was a lot of what we used to call like seduction and betrayal, meaning you'd get the interview, you'd get the quotes, the things you need, you did the reporting, and then you might not see them again. And so moving
Yeah.
into therapy was a natural transition because you're doing all this quote unquote reporting, right? It's much, much deeper than that, obviously. But you're building a relationship. And so my switch from journalism to psychology came from working at Psychology Today, the financial crash of 2008. I started taking courses in psychology and eventually ended up in a PhD program. And similar to you, once I made the transition from writing, and there's a bunch of other jobs that we could talk about if you want, but I made the switch into a doctoral program in clinical psychology in New York. And I was in a cohort of probably, I'd say, 16, 17. I was one of two males in that program. And I was like, we are learning so many interesting things about the human condition. Like, why is this a space that is predominantly female here? Why? And my cohort of women in my cohort, they were brilliant. They were awesome people. But the question just remained inside, like, why is this something that just a fraction of a percentage of men are going to be experiencing? And you said 25% or 30% are male
In
therapists
the UK,
overall.
20.
Yeah, 20. In the US, it's 25, or it depends on what year you look at the stats. But when you look at the younger demographic, under 30, I think it's even lower. At least as of 2023, it was. We can look back at the stats. But that was really concerning to me. And then that's when I came into the space of men's mental health, and I'm thinking, I want to go to a place where I'm needed. I want to go somewhere where I feel like I can contribute. My background, it's not remarkable, but it is remarkable in the sense that I hadn't met anyone else who was raised in hockey locker rooms or had a sort of the same rough and tumble boyhood. And then we're entering this quote unquote
Yeah.
softer profession, right? So there's a duality between strength and sensitivity that I wanted to dive into. And I didn't see a lot of other guys in my program or in the surrounding New York City area. I worked in hospitals and clinics. Um, I can count on one hand those that I came across who had something that even rhymed with that background. And I think men are needed in this field. And I'll end on that point.
Mm. There's so much crossover between you and I, and that was what our initial conversation was way back in early 24. Feels like a lifetime ago for me now. In terms of the sporting background, the journalism background, the having never even been told that psychology was a thing that existed. Basically, that
Yep.
therapy, when somebody, and you will hear all of this when Jett interviews me, but when somebody suggested to me to be a therapist, I laughed in their face. Like, what?
Yes.
I can't be a therapist. The American equivalent would be jock, right? Like,
Yes.
I'm some rugby lad. Lad is the thing in the UK, right? I'm some rugby lad, like reformed rugby lad. What the hell? But that realization, like you've just said, but there are men like me who need support. And I'm going to read now a little excerpt from that article that Jett wrote, because to me it speaks to what we're talking about here. So I've prepped Jett for this. He knows it's coming. So a commonly cited reason for ending treatment among men is the, quote, lack of connection or understanding with their therapist. According to one study, men are less likely to seek therapy and drop out sooner, hindering the effectiveness of treatment. Men may be more likely to consider and then enter treatment if they believe that they belong. And part of that may mean perceiving that a practitioner has also traversed boyhood's treacherous terrains. Beautiful writing. When communicated between men, seemingly banal phrases such as, I hear you, man, depending on their pitch and intonation, can land like a melody full of meaning. It may directly signal love, or be a more subtle nod to the shared experience of enduring play through pain culturing programming. As one of the only men during my doctoral training, I often felt like a reluctant ambassador for nearly half of the human population, and it was alienating. It was meaningful to have a male therapist of my own. And I love that, because when I read that, all I could think was, the whole time we were training, I kept thinking, but this concept, this approach, this counseling technique doesn't sit well with me. My foundation course was psychodynamic.
Mm-hmm.
And I recall in the experiential group, which is where you sit and you talk about what's going on in the space between you, the psychodynamic, the kind of classic Freudian therapists are completely blank screen. They don't give you anything back. And I thought, like, to me, as somebody who is still learning how to open up, that was really off-putting. And I'm somebody who'd already done work on myself. I'd already been to therapy. So what was it for you, Jett, in your training and in your understanding of the kind of male condition that made you want to start focusing on men and realize, well, men need maybe a different approach?
I began with the psychodynamic foundation, similar to you. Um, and there's so much diversity even within psychodynamic psychotherapy, right? It's Freud was, many years ago, and you know, contemporary psychoanalytic thinking is changed a lot. But nevertheless, there has been this sense of, um, you know, using silence in the room that you alluded to, the um, not bringing a lot of your own character or personality into a room as a therapist, the blank screen sort of mentality. And I, like you, was taking all of this in, and but the difference is with clinical work is that you then have to apply it. So you're not just learning it and typing about it and writing papers on it and theorizing about it. You actually have to implement it. You have to take it from an idea into a practice. And what I was finding is, like, I was mainly working with women because that's who came to therapy in these clinics that I was working in
Right.
at the time. But when I started to work in let's say, hospitals' addictions units, right? Dual diagnosis, meaning that someone had a substance use issue alongside another clinical problem they were dealing with. You start to see more men. I then worked in the VA system, right? Disproportionately male veterans, although there's many female veterans now as well. And so what I began to learn was, oh my gosh, these interventions um, weren't necessarily landing. Like, there was a big problem within the VA system of there was a quoting from the clinical notes, lost to follow up. It was just scattered all over. And I was thinking,
What
there's
does that
something
mean? Lost to follow up.
Lost to follow up meant that, like, there's a male veteran who came in for therapy, maybe for the first time, felt like it wasn't a match, felt like he didn't belong, perhaps speculating. You don't say the reasons why. And then when the clinician tried to follow up, they didn't respond. They were just kind of gone. They were off into the ether. And so that that's the US language in the notes, like lost to follow up. And I'm like, thinking to myself, what is going on? And over the course of time, it became clear that those beginning sessions of psychotherapy, you can really lose a guy in those moments. It's such an alien experience, as I wrote in that piece you said. It was, you don't want to ask men to change before they come into therapy. That doesn't make sense. We have to change therapy to tailor to men. And I didn't see that anywhere. It just, no one was doing that. There were some authors who were talking about it. A guy named Gary Brooks written a book, years earlier, but there just wasn't a lot out there for me to latch onto and say, how do I work with a Marine sniper who has never looked another man in the eye and told him anything remotely close to his feelings? This is a foreign experience here. And, I felt like I actually had some of the tools of doing that because I had to relate to that archetype of male before in my childhood. And so a lot of my thinking in the last 10 years is, how do I bring in the research, my own personal experience, and my clinical experience to make therapy work for men? And the type of client that I work with is, I'll quote from an actual email I got recently. Well, I've never really been a big believer in therapy, but I'll give it a try. Right?
But here I am.
Right? But here I am. Yeah. Exactly. It's the pre-contemplative, contemplative state of change that you're seeing them in, that you're taking them in. And so, we could talk about sort of the different interventions that you can use to build a therapeutic alliance. Hopefully in this podcast, we can dive into things like that. There's a burgeoning research body that are showing us some of the things that do work for men. But most of all, and I think you've said this in your writing and in our conversations, that it's like, you have to bring your authentic self into the room with a guy. You cannot be a buttoned up. You cannot be overly professorial or pedantic, or you have to give them something, and often give them something valuable early on, is what I've learned. And there's a lot of things to do to build trust, to build that therapeutic alliance. But so that's one of the things that, I noticed and that I want to bring to this field as much as I can.
One of the things that's been most fascinating for me about starting Men's Therapy Hub is I have been witness to men creating their therapeutic profiles. And I have also seen more male therapy websites than I ever thought I would, as I've been reaching out to people, but also like, oh, who is this guy who signed up? And like looking for guys who have a specialization in working with men. And on my course, I very specifically remember one Saturday day, like where we have an 8-hour on a Saturday, which I enjoyed, by the way. I enjoyed being at school on a Saturday. I enjoyed being at school for the first time. So that was a big barometer for me to say I was in the right place. Was our lecturer saying the absolute importance of not self-disclosing as a therapist. So not bringing yourself into the therapy room in terms of your personal experiences. So I put my hand up and I was like, well, I've been a journalist for 10 years. I've written a book which was semi-autobiographical. A lot of my writing has been, almost all of my writing is, here's a little snippet of how my experience marries up with this. And then here's research and here's my opinion. And so I was like, the cat's out of the bag, man. Like, I can't. And he's like, okay, well, from now on, no more. And I remember sitting in the room just being like, no, no, because if I'm going to be a therapist, I'm going to be me as a therapist, and I will live and die by that. And
Yep.
if my clients don't like it, I wouldn't have any, and they won't stay. And then maybe I'll rethink. But what you talked about there is this burgeoning understanding of we need to somehow show the men in the room. Sometimes therapy is about, it's not only about mirroring and reflecting, it's also about leading by example. And so if a client is really struggling to open up, one of the things that I say to my clients, for example, is you have to remember that long before I was a therapist, I was a man. And so I know this space. I don't know your exact struggles, but I know the struggle of opening up emotionally. Oh, yeah, right. Okay, because I'm not just an expert at this, I'm learning still too. And I have a therapist, and I'm actually on a break from my therapist right now. But like I have been in therapy, so I know how hard this is. All right. And what you talked about there was you've now, to the world of the 8 people listening to this first episode, explained your history and your background, which we're not supposed to do. But I'm interested to know more because there are so many men out there who have a similar sporty jock lad culture, unemotional father, the kind of archetypes, the traditions that we've gone through as men who are coming to therapy. And so how much of that do you bring? How do you decide when to bring it? And how much do you actually share of yourself?
Well, when it comes to therapeutic self-disclosure, it's different than the self-disclosure you don't know that you're doing, which is when you get Googled or someone puts your name into
Sure.
ChatGPT, whatever it is. It's and the name that I have is, for better and for worse, somewhat unique. So there's not that many of me around. So if you Google me, there's a good chance it's me and maybe some other kid in New Mexico who shares my name. And so they're
Yeah,
going to find articles.
there's one guy who works at PricewaterhouseCooper called Chris Hemmings that I know of,
Oh
and
no.
that's basically
Yes.
that's it. It's me and him. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you should connect. One day I'll connect with the other Jett Stone that I know out there, that I've heard is out there. So there's that. So you don't know the degree to which they're building a dossier on you right before they even meet you.
Mm.
But then there's the therapeutic self-disclosure, and that's been written about endlessly, especially by psychodynamic writers. And I would say the psychodynamic world is much more cautious about self-disclosing. That's what I was originally trained in. But when I went more into the CBTs, the third wave behavioral therapies, they were less hung up on that question of self-disclosure. And where I've come to on that is that, you know, I'm going to self-disclose when I feel like it's in the service of the treatment, when it's in the service of this person that I'm sitting across from. If it's just to get something off my chest or just for the sake of, catharsis, it's not, it's not the end of the world if that happens, but it's unhelpful. And so I try to be as pointed with my self-disclosure. Like, I'm a dad too. I know what it's like to feel like you want to pull out your hair when your kid is not, you know, getting into the bath or leaving for school. Like, yeah, man, that's so incredibly frustrating. Let's talk about what's living beneath the surface of that for you. Or even something to the effect of, yeah, man, I know what it's like to, grow up in a culture where it feels like it's really dangerous to express how you really feel. So it has to be in the service of something. And so usually before I say it, it's like, what is this adding to the picture? Sometimes I failed doing that, honestly. You know, uh, if I have to share something, oh, there's a member of my family who's had that same issue that your member of the family has. It's like, that doesn't really land. Why are you saying that? So I guess my thing is, I have to answer the question to myself, why am I saying this before I say it? Um, this isn't a friendship. A therapy relationship isn't, I had a supervisor. He's like, this isn't a cocktail party we're doing here. And I think we have to bring something different, especially with men, to the table, that I am not your friend. I can be friendly. I could speak a similar, dialect. I could be plain language, but I am not your friend. And that's why this relationship is beautiful, because you can tell me the things you would never even tell your friend or someone else. And so, in order to build that trust, sometimes it means, yeah, man, sometimes I don't know what the hell I'm doing either when it comes to, I always bring up parenting because it's a great domain to self disclose, but that's just one that comes to mind right now. So
Mm.
I'm judicious when it comes to self disclosure, I would say, but much more open to it than I was in my training.
One of the beauty one of the beautiful things that can happen with self-disclosure is that moment of mutual empathy, which can really soften somebody. A guy who is no, I openly specialize. It says on my profile, I specialize in guys who haven't been to therapy before, because they're the guys that I want to help. They're the guys that I really want to say, like, come on, like, come in. It makes sense that I then run men's therapy hub. Like, it all makes sense to me.
Right.
But to these guys coming in, I think sometimes we forget. We hear this like, oh, men just need to talk more. Men just go to therapy, and you just spoke about there, like all through our formative years, as many of us as men, and not all men will have had the same experiences of this. We grew up, you and I, by the sounds of it, very similarly, in environments where to self-disclose was to risk a huge amount. How has it been for you on this journey from, you know, hockey jock to to increasingly emotionally intelligent, let's call it, right?
It's a
That's
project,
that.
man.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's a never ending. And the joke I make to my clients is the more I learn about psychology, the less I realize I know. Um, this huge transition, because we're asking, you and I are in essence inviting men, asking men to take on a journey and a task that we have done ourselves. So one of the questions I'm going to ask guests on the show, and we're recording these out of order, so I haven't actually asked the next few guests, but I will
Hmm.
do. I'm not going to ask you, because the question is, have you been to therapy? I know that you have,
Right.
but I guess the question is, what was it like for you to take those first initial steps into a therapeutic space? To throw off the shackles of years of, or you know what, generations of suppression hardwired into us.
Yes. Um, I was the first. So I entered into therapy when I started therapy training. And at least in the US, like it's an unspoken rule. If you're going to train to be a therapist, you have to have experience in your own therapy.
Yeah.
But I also had a lot of things that I was dealing with. I also very much needed it. I was the, like you had said earlier, I didn't therapy, like becoming a therapist. That was not on my bingo card. Like when I was a kid, it's not something that I had ever imagined doing. It kind of like made me squirm a little bit, even just saying it at the time. I'm shedding that, right? Oh, and so when I first entered into therapy, it was an alienating experience. I went to one therapist, felt like it wasn't a match. And by the way, I was looking for a male therapist. I was I was, I just married, thinking about maybe starting a family. I don't know. I had a lot of confusion. I wanted a male therapist to answer to answer to me, and and be another father figure in my life to complement what my father gave me and what he didn't give me. Um, and so when I came to therapy, I was like, you know, it- well, didn't land with this one. I went into another one who was a better fit for me. And I just remember sitting across, and over the course of time, it was very, very tense and kind of like, you know, sort of performing. And then over the course of sessions, like I started to let my hair down a little bit, loosen up, and sort of begin to understand what this was about. And that's when I started to understand some of the self hatred that I carried with me, despite being well liked. I didn't really love myself. Um, and I, I hadn't tackled my own defensiveness. I was a very defensive person. I was very quick to the, quick-witted, quick to the punch, right? And I wasn't getting into fights, but I was definitely like, it was, it was difficult for me to take some, criticism, let's say on the ice or on the field playing. Like I was the one I loved trash talking. I loved it. I was very good at it, despite my, pleasant looking maybe exterior of being a nice person. I could be a nasty son of a bitch. And I allowed that out on the playing field. I didn't know, I was able to contain it. But anyhow, so when I was in therapy, I'll just give you an example of something that I learned. You know, I had felt like my therapist, who I will not name, but he's a wonderful person, was kind of mailing it in and was annoying me session after session. I was like, he's just kind of like passive. Like, step up to the plate. Give me something here, man. That's kind of like what I was afraid to say to him. And so what ended up happening was I came in and I walked into one session and I handed him the check for therapy. This was back when it wasn't all automated,
Hmm.
and he he took it, right? And then the next session, he's like, when you handed me that check last week, you made me get up out of my seat and walk to you to grab it. He just made that observation to me. And I was like, I did? No, I didn't. That sort of defensiveness came online. And then it occurred to me, I was like, holy shit, I did. I did do that. I was being like, very passive aggressive, with a lot of emphasis on the passive part there, because it wasn't like I punched him or said something nasty. Um, but then it occurred to me is like, I sort of bury some of that. And he pointed it out to me. And it took me a long time to kind of come to terms with like, yeah, that's the type of thing that I'm capable of. And so it took me a while to sort of go from like tightly wound to opening up and observing it myself. And that's an example of how you can use the therapeutic relationship. And this is more psychodynamic, but I think it's a great example of it. You can use this therapeutic relationship itself as a way to help direct men towards, healthier behaviors, better connection, and turning down some of their defensive moves. So
To point out what is happening in the room, that is kind of you will still try to deny it, but in the long run is undeniable.
Yep.
It's so interesting, and I'm getting to know you more on this podcast because we haven't been speaking about our personal journeys. But my first proper therapeutic relationship, after about 7 or 8 sessions, I said to my therapist, he's male, he was brilliant, and I said to him, I feel like you're letting me get away with stuff. Like I'm I'm not going as deep as I think that I can.
Mm-hmm.
And so then he goes away, and I realize now he speaks to his supervisor, and he comes back the next week and he says, right, you are banned about talking about your book. You are banned from talking about any of this work you think you have done on yourself previously. No, done. You have to stop, and you are only going to be talking about what's going on in this room. And there was just this like, okay. All
There you
right.
go.
It's like now we've both arrived here. Like I needed that like compassionate dad voice. That's what my supervisor calls it, right? The compassionate dad. I needed somebody to be stern with me, but in a compassionate way, because he's like, just because you've written a book doesn't mean you know squat about like your your psychology. Like you're not an expert on this. You're an expert on yourself, but I was using it as a cover to explain things away. And so what happened with both of us is our therapist goes out on a bit of a limb and takes a risk. And I'll say this to my clients, like, actually by saying this, I feel like I'm taking a bit of a risk, but I feel like if I don't say it, then we're missing something. And please correct me if it's wrong, blah, 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 but X, Y, Z. And that's where I think men are more used to being spoken to in that way. And
There you
so
go.
they're less likely to be offended by it.
Yes. what you said it just sparked so much because you're talking now at the level of intervention too with men that I, I was on a bus a few months ago and I was listening into other people's conversations as I do. And there was these two guys sitting next to each other and they were talking about their therapy. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'll miss my stop to make sure I gather this information. And one of the biggest takeaways from it was, I want my therapist to step up to the plate and just say the thing, quote unquote. I wrote it down. That's verbatim what he said. And the other guy was like, me too. I wish he would just take that shot. And these are metaphors, right, that they're using here. But it's exactly what you said, that actually one of the interventions is, and that was helpful for me as it was for you, evidently, was that a therapist who just went in there and said, you know what, I could be wrong here, but it really sounds like you're XYZ trying to, right? Like edit, I always say, swat this away if you feel like this doesn't make sense or you want to edit it. But this is what I'm thinking. And I oftentimes do that early on because I want them to see that this is not a passive experience here, therapy. It's like, I'm going to take my shot. I'm modeling to you. You can take your shot with an intervention that feels like it's, or an interpretation that feels like it's kind of, you know, difficult to say or vulnerable. And so step up to the plate, right? And sometimes being upfront early on can really be helpful to men to know that, oh, this is a therapist who's going to like not just bottle up and say things, they're going to, it's therapeutic style, but they're going to say the thing sometimes. They're going to give me feedback as well. So I love that you phrased it that way, because the other intervention is in there is men, and this is research shows this too, is appreciate directness in plain English or plain language, depending on what language you're speaking, right? It's direct, and in the psychodynamic term is experience near, meaning that like the language that you use with a male client can be very helpful if it reflects his inner world and how he would speak. So it's not necessarily that you have to like speak a different language to um, be on the same page as him. It's that you can use his words and the way that he describes things to then put it back at him. Like if they call themselves a real, asshole at work, I'm like, well, you've just given me permission to call you an asshole, right?
Yeah.
Safely. And so I'll come up and step up to the plate and try to say something like, is this one of those moments where you're being a total asshole? Right? Like,
Right.
I'm just giving you like, a very raw example.
Yeah. A great example for me would be, unsurprisingly, given I work entirely with men. I know you don't work entirely with men.
That's right.
I have a lot of men who have drug addictions, alcohol addictions, and one of the things that I've become quite adept at is allowing my clients who take drugs to know that I have taken drugs in the past, without specifically saying I have taken drugs in the past. It's the use of the language, the terminology, the
Mm-hmm.
buying a bag, like, going out and having a pint and then making a call, like all those sorts of things. That's those who don't know what any of that stuff means, good on you. Those who do, good on you.
Yes.
And it's about helping them to recognize that like they're not alone in this world, even though like I'm a professional. Like I'm also a human outside this room too, and I have my own challenges and my own vices and my own many different things. But there will also be a time when a client is completely refusing to understand the challenge that he's facing, when I will say, well, do you know what? Cocaine was my vice after the death of my dad. I used it to cover up all of the pain that I was feeling. So I understand what it's like to use drugs in that way.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And I won't go into any more detail about it. And I will specifically say, and there'll be no more questions about that, right? But that's just so you know that I haven't, but that's not like day one. That would be day 20. That would be session 20,
Right.
only at the right time. to bring something in to say, I feel you, I know you, and also I know more about this than probably you realized before, because sometimes I need to show that it's okay to be vulnerable. Because otherwise,
Yeah.
like we haven't had role models, vulnerable role models as men. I didn't have a single one growing up. So I have to be that for my clients. I feel that deeply.
Yes. Yes. And you back pocketed that self-disclosure for a time when it was right to use. And because part of the therapeutic alliance is knowing as a therapist, like, what a client would be able to take in and metabolize and what they might not be able to. Right? It's like you have a better sense of that. You had the sense at session 20, whatever it was, that he could hear that and not feel um, dysregulated
Yeah,
by
like
it.
railroaded by my
Right.
experience. Yeah.
Right. I mean, basically what we're talking about here is using language to regulate help regulate their nervous system in a way, like to help put them in a place where they can breathe easier and open up and look inward and look at their relationships. And all of what we're talking about is one way to do that
Mm.
through the use of language and building the therapeutic relationship through
Yeah.
self-disclosure.
I think the most powerful one from my personal experience with therapy is with clients, particularly young clients who come in struggling with their sexuality, and actually, I have to try to explain to them internalized homophobia, because many of them have never come across that terminology. They don't know what it is. For those of you that don't know what internalized homophobia is, so I'm bisexual. I didn't come out as bisexual till I was 27 years old, and I hated that side of myself because I'd grown up in a culture that was homophobic. So I had internalized that homophobia and pointed that hatred back at myself. It's the same with internalized racism, internalized misogyny, internalized ableism. There's lots of it. Um, and actually, sometimes with those clients in session 3, I will be like, "All right, I need to meet you in this because you actually don't have any point of reference for it." So I can say, well, here is a point of reference. Here's my experience of it.
Yes.
Does that help you to understand your experience? And mostly it does, right? And that can be powerful, but I think it can also be it can be overused, it can be misused.
Yeah.
And where do you find that the line is for that? How do you figure that out? Is it just a case by case basis?
It's a good question. And I wish I had an elegant answer for you, but it really is a case by case basis. One of the things that I track is, um, you know, in my caseload of people that I see, there's a spectrum of how much I feel seen as a therapist in the room with them. I don't mean like they're asking me questions necessarily, but there's a sort of a relational dynamic where does it feel like you're talking with this person or this person is talking at you, right? Sometimes that points at personality. It helps direct you. And I think there, like when you track that, like what does it feel like to sit across from this person? Is it a give and take? Are they listening and taking in? Are they using it as a soapbox for themselves? Like there's just different variations of that. And so sometimes self-disclosure, you'll get like a blank face and it'll mean nothing.
Mm,
Sometimes you'll get self-disclosure and like we've just talked about, it could be make a person feel so seen and connected and understood and that, here's another guy I'm sitting across from who's modeling self-disclosure and vulnerability. And then sometimes you'll get someone who you'll say something and it'll be silent and you could tell that um, it's knocked them off. Like they didn't want to hear that. And from a
mm,
psychodynamic framework, you've ruined their ability to project upon you, meaning that they no longer have the fantasy of who their therapist is because you've ruined it with reality by telling them. Do you know what I mean?
mm.
And so there are some therapists who would say, well, you've kind of scuttled an opportunity here because you could have, instead of saying, if they ask, oh, how do you identify sexually? And you just tell them that you could have asked, well, what do you imagine
Yeah.
I identify
Or, or,
as?
or, or why is it important that you know?
Exactly. And I think that is a great question. And I tend to be the type of person who will say, look, I want to know what your fantasy is about that. And I'm okay answering it. But first, let's talk about the fantasy, right?
Right.
So I could just kind of put at ease. Like, I'm not this dodging of question person. I want to be direct with you. But I also, that's an important part of therapy. I am not your
Mm.
friend. I am not your dad. I'm not your coach necessarily, unless you're doing coaching. Um, and yeah, that's part of it is sussing out who the person is at a personality level, what they can take, their relational style. All those things come together in like a very non-quantifiable picture of
Mm.
like, should I use self-disclosure or not?
We're talking here about one aspect of changing the game. Because what you said before is what I've been saying for a long time, and it's the kind of the Zach Seidler approach. Zach's going to be coming on at some point soon. He was
Awesome.
like, oh, I'm busy. I'm on the road, and then I see he's on the stage with Prince Harry, and I'm like, oh, busy were we? Like, I'm a big fan of a lot of Zach's work. We need to change the model to fit men.
hmm
For you, with your experience, and you have many more years experience in session with clients than I do, what are the most classic or the most common challenges that your average Joe who comes into therapy, who's never spoken to somebody about their feelings before, what are the biggest hurdles that guy has to overcome?
Not even so. Not even having a sense of what that would look like. Sometimes, if you haven't been vulnerable or you haven't felt deeply in a very long time, because most of these guys who come in who are maybe the most shut down, walled off, it's not like they have less emotions than a more emotional counterpart who'd come to therapy. No, no, no. It's they've built up all of these protective mechanisms that make it so difficult for them to even know what that means to open
Right.
up.
They have just less access to them.
Yes, they have less access to them. And so part of the alienating experience of therapy is like, am I just supposed to come in and walk into the room and like cr- just start crying? Is that like what I'm supposed to do? And so like vulnerability isn't tears, crying. That can be a powerful indicator of vulnerability, but that's not the thing. And there's risk, there's exposure that you take. You have to slow things down. And so for that guy, the most, let's say, walled off, um, is that don't you can't push that person to become more emotional. You can't wait either with silence. You have to ask the right questions. You have to slow things down enough. And oftentimes, I think starting somatically with the body, like what's showing up in your body when you think about getting bullied as a kid or getting shouted down by your father when he came home from work and smelled of alcohol, right? You start there. And a lot of times with men, is you call it inner child work. And now we're sort of advancing past once you have the therapeutic relationship and you're trying to get them to open up more and feel more deeply, is they will have more compassion and ability to see themselves as kids or to see their own kids than they can to see themselves as dependent adults who need others. And so I think so one of the tools that I use that I'm building a presentation around some of these tools now is like helping men orient like with sensory cues, like almost like an type of exposure, right? Therapists have been doing this for many, many years with chair work and inner child work. But I've been doing it more and more, having men close their eyes and sort of taking to them to the place where maybe they felt the most shame, where they were a wounded or vulnerable kid. And they learned to take on these defense mechanisms or coping styles or moves. So one of the things that I do before I expect tears and vulnerability is to sort of walk them back into their history a little bit to access like some of the scenes of where this began. And then over the course of time, once you say, yeah, it makes a lot of sense that you became shut down. It was we sometimes call like the intelligence of the adaptation. It's an intelligent thing that you learned how to do. Your dad was a scary motherfucker. Like I'm glad that you learned to tiptoe around him, right? And shut yourself down. But like you've become you could teach a master class on that right now, right? It's helpful at your work. You walk into the law firm and it's the same thing. But whatever you learned as a kid is making you into a really difficult person to be married to, let's say, or to be in a relationship with, in just general. And so once they start to see the kid within and they slow things down, you help them feel that in their body first. It's like then they start to get more connected, and then you can give them words like fear, shame, um, or whatever it is. You want to speak their language a little bit. You don't want to go straight into the core emotion right away. So I guess I answered your question by saying they come in with no tools, and it's our job as therapists to help find a windy road to take them to the place where they can start to feel. And look, I've failed at that at times in my career. It's very, very hard to do. Um, a lot of times it stays in the cognitive, intellectual space more than I would like it to. But every once in a while, you can find an inroad and elicit that more deeply feeling part.
There was a part of that that really struck with me, which was the slow it down. One of the earliest thoughts I had in terms of repeat experience with clients was, dude, are you trying to win at therapy? You're 6 sessions in and you're kind of becoming frustrated that things aren't changing for you? To which I then remind them in my introductory session that I told them this will get harder before it gets easier. And sometimes I make the joke, or I'll give you your money back. Like, it has to get harder before it gets easier. It is not just an upward trajectory from day one. And I think that's part of the misperception of therapy is it's like I go to the doctor, they give me tablets and things get better. It's like, well, no, we have to re-expose the old wound. We have to bring stuff up that has been shut off, that has been, people overuse the term compartmentalize, but like the things that have been suppressed or repressed, the only way that we can change our responses to them is to bring them to the surface, because therapy isn't about changing your past, it's about changing your relationship to it.
Yep.
But a lot of men come and say, well, okay, in 8 weeks, I want this and I want this to happen and I want change. And one of the big challenges for us as therapists working with men is how do we convince them that this is not one of those times where we can just like hammer in a couple of nails and we have a new structure. This is about semi-dismantling the structure and rebuilding in a new way with stronger foundations.
Yeah. And you're pointing to something important that a lot of the research does show when, working with men, it's important to have structure and be clear about goals. I mean, that's important for anyone using therapy, but maybe more important for men. And I think what you're pointing to is that from my experience, and I don't know what other research would support this, it's that to me, that's important, that structure and giving them, a sense of how long therapy is, plain English explanation of therapy, basically. Up front is our job to psychoeducate and do that up front. So we say, like you said, it could get worse before it gets better. It's the problem is that therapies can wind into different roads, and it's not so linear. It's not like 6 sessions and then you'll be, cured. And there are some things, there are some psychological issues out there where, yes, like, insomnia, you could do a short-term treatment. I mean, there are some treatments that are short-term and do work, but most of the time it takes a little bit of time to undo some of the things that have taken decades to come about in the first place. And I always say, my metaphor is like if the river's been flowing in one direction for 30 years, it's not going to take 3 sessions for it to start flowing in a different direction. It takes a lot of work. Um, and so that's part psychoeducation. And like, I think the clarity up front, so front loading clarity is a very important intervention with men. We can't assume that they know what the hell is going on. I didn't
Mm.
in therapy. Be clear. It's not about lying on a couch and spilling your guts. It's building a relationship with someone who, like I said, is not your family, not your friends, who can sort out what's going on and help you see blind spots, figure out what to do next.
And I'm going to be here every week, rain or shine.
That's right. Yes. I'm not your drinking buddy. I'm not,
Right.
I'm not saying that maybe too much here, but I think that that's part of it, is that when you're spoken to as a guy, as someone who's not a family member or a friend, it's different. It's a different experience. You might sound like a buddy of yours. I might have that same sort of intonation and style, but I'm here for a different reason. So, and one of the things I also see, I'm sure you do as well, is that there's a fear in a lot of guys starting therapy that, oh God, I don't want this to be a pity party. I'm a pretty privileged dude. I don't want to feel like, like the issues that I have are, look at the people, you know, in Sudan or,
Hmm.
in the Middle East who are suffering far more than I am. Like, there's a lot of undoing, a lot of couching it and saying, well, my problems, minimizing. You see that in a lot of guys. And so you have to kind of take that down, say, that's not what this is about. We're not comparing. So there's a fear of, um, being handled too softly or being pitied, or that it's an ick. It's the male ick, right?
Yeah.
Um, so I, I think that can derail therapy too.
I think that speaks to the provider protector role that is deeply ingrained in the male psyche because so I spoke to Ellen O'Donoghue, who is the CEO of James's Place, one of the charities that we're supporting. James's Place is a place that is um, almost immediate triage for men who are suicidal.
Yeah.
And they get multiple sessions and they are seen within like 2 days. And she said that the biggest barrier that she faces, or that their practitioners face, is men coming and saying, well, I don't believe that I'm worthy of this time. To
Yes.
which James's Place have to explain to them, like, we exist specifically for you right now, my man. Like, that's why you're here. But these guys are like, well, but there's somebody who is more worthy of it than me.
Yes.
And my parents said to me, and many of my clients' parents said to them, oh, well, there's kids starving in Africa. It's like, yeah, I know that there is. But that doesn't mean that my pain right now is any less real.
Right.
Because everybody's worst experience of pain is their worst experience of pain. And I really hope that we move away from this kind of trauma contest that we live in, right? Where, oh, well, being violently abused as a man is somehow less problematic for that man because it's a man that's doing it, and it's therefore more problematic for a woman if it's a man abusing a woman. And it's like, well, why does it matter that it's more or less? The reality is that it's traumatic for both in their own way.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of men struggle with that because they have swallowed the rhetoric of male privilege. They've
Yep.
swallowed the rhetoric of the provider protector, particularly
Hmm.
the protector of, I actually shouldn't have any problems. And you're a father. I'm not. For you, how did you overcome that? Because there has to be a point where you realize I am worthy of care and compassion and love, and I am worthy of speaking my pain. And I have to somehow begin to recognize that I'm not a burden on others when I do. In fact, I become more of a burden on others when I
Hmm.
don't, because in the long run, my behaviors start to explode out in places that they shouldn't because I haven't dealt with it. How did
Yes.
you begin to, the Movember terminology is the rucksack, right? How did you begin to put that rucksack down that you'd been carrying for so many years?
Hmm. I carried it with me. meaning that I carried it with me. I had to make conscious throughout my day, and still do, by the way, um, my propensity to feel unworthy. For example, I still have a lot of holdups crying in front of my wife. That's changed, but I felt like if I break down into tears, I break down and I no longer become the man that she needs me to be, or my kids need me to
That you
be.
permanently lose something.
Yes, yes,
Mm.
yes. I annihilate some part of myself. Um, it's a dissonance. I am strong. I'm sturdy. That's part of my sense of what it, you know, means to be a man. Meaning that, like, I want people in my presence to feel like things are going to be okay, right? In a very visceral
Mm.
sense. When I'm in the room, shit's going to be all right. That's one way I define my brand of manhood. At the same time, that rule, if I live governed by it in a rigid way, becomes detrimental to me. And so I carry that around with me, literally. Sometimes I carry pictures with me, or I have post-it notes, or I have um, visuals that kind of remind me of that. And so I'm checking in on it sometimes. And this is why therapy is not just in session; it's practice you bring throughout the week. So I'm thinking to myself, like, is this one of those moments where I feel like I want to share something and cry from a movie or whatever it is? And it's like, why am I so held up about this? And it was just experimenting with it, vulnerability, to change it. I use that word with my male patients a lot. I don't know all my patients, but it's like, okay, fine, I get it. You don't feel like you can cry, or you want to, or it doesn't even come up, or you don't feel like you can be vulnerable in any way. And, like, why don't you experiment with talking about your fear to your, you know, to someone you trust? Why don't you experiment talking about, what it was, why it's so hard for you to work through this addiction problem that you have, why you don't want to live anymore. Like, what would it be like? And they're like, no, no one, I'm a burden. It's going to, I don't want to lay that on somebody. I have that messaging still too. Um, and so it's not until you start to do these behavioral experiments and slowly prove to yourself, oh, I actually, that person, like, got to know me more. I'm more seen. I'm more understood. And over the course of time, that just becomes, you become better at it. You become more three-dimensional, more human, actually. And that's one of the things that I tell men is, like, it's about being more, like, humanize yourself. Right now, you are the superhero. Right now, you are this big oak to your kids, let's say. Tell them a little bit about yourself. Tell them a little bit about the things that you were scared about when you were 10. And so slowly experimenting with that and getting good feedback. One of the phrases that a great master therapist named George Fowler, he's an emotionally focused therapy, he's an awesome guy. He calls it success in vulnerability, meaning that these micro moments of success in vulnerability build up and build up and build up and build up over time to the point where you become more free and more open, more relational.
Mm.
So I guess it's just a long-winded way of saying exposure and in small ways building up.
And to use gym language, which lands with a lot of men, I talk about you need to do the reps.
Yep.
You have to
Yes.
go out, and this is where I don't know where other therapists would be on this, but there will be a point where I say, do you know what? We've talked about this enough. Your homework is to go and have that difficult conversation with that person who we've been talking about. And I'm not saying that you have to do it this week, but an aim that we have.
Yes.
That we are now building towards you having that difficult conversation. And sometimes, do you know what, Jett? Clients will leave because they don't want to have it. And the reality is, I don't feel like I've failed there because maybe on occasion I have, but actually therapy is one thing. But if you don't take the work out into the field
Yep.
afterwards, then you don't get the benefit from it. But what you've talked about there is the micro successes, because a client can say, oh, but I'm just not moving anywhere and I'm still feeling all of this shame and blah, blah. And I'm like, what do you mean you're not moving anywhere? You've just told me how you feel on a deep emotional level. 10 weeks ago, you were just going, I don't know, I don't know. And now you're able to tell me. So we're one down. There's one human in the
Mhm.
world who knows how you feel.
Yep.
So that is a success. And I'm not huge on positive psychology, but I do like parts of it. And I think if we, I think it's also our job as therapists to be like cheerleaders for our clients. Because one of the biggest frustrations I had with my whole training was when I have a client who comes to me like, I've had a fucking awesome week. We weren't trained how to be like, yes, like,
Yes, you're
yes,
right.
great. Like,
Right.
how do we sit for the next 45, 50 minutes and talk about how awesome you are this week?
Yep.
How do we
Yep.
big you up? You know, I make this joke like I'm not fully down with the Buddhist concept of all life is suffering, but you know what? Quite a fucking lot of it is. So when we're having a good week, can we sit with our clients and go, can we talk about what it feels like to be
Right.
in a good place
Yep.
and to be their cheerleader? Because therapy isn't just tell me about your deepest pain and trauma. Therapy can be laughter. Therapy can be uh, terrifying. Therapy can be, you know, I can make a fool of myself as a therapist. You're like, we are two humans in a space being human together and trying to find a way to increase our mutual humanity.
Yeah. Yes.
And I think that we need to somehow find I mean, we're trying to do it right now with this, trying to find a way to help more men to understand that therapy is not a kind of a middle-aged woman with glasses with the chains on that come down, looking over it with a notepad while you lie down and talk about the fact that you wanted to have sex with your mum. Like,
Right.
very few people wanted to have sex with their own mum. My suggestion is maybe Freud wanted to have sex with his own mum and created an entire fucking therapeutic framework around it. Like, dude,
Yes.
but that's not what therapy is now.
No.
Therapy is
No.
changing. And there are so many therapists work integrative, which means they work in a whole different
Yes.
variety of, again, the term is modalities, types of therapy. And we need to somehow let men know that people like you and me are here, and people who are like, there's a guy on men's therapy which is like calls himself like, I think he's like the nerd therapist or the gamer therapist, and then there's the guy who's the masculinity therapist, and it's like, cool. It's like yes and yes and yes and.
Yep. Yes. I mean, you said so much there. It's like, um, just to go chronological, if I can remember all the beautiful nuggets there, is that putting the emotion in emotion is what I've framed it as. Maybe I didn't, I can't
Mm,
claim that's my own, but that's the way that I think about it. It's like once you get to this place of feeling deeply, it's like it's very helpful with guys to say, okay, let's do a behavioral experiment this week. Let's take it home. Like, make this, try to integrate this into your daily life. What we've gotten from therapy today. And then, when they do well, it's like being the cheerleader. You're exactly right. So if anyone is listening right now who knows someone who's ever researched or studied how to celebrate success or join patients in moments of pride, I would love to know what's out there. Like, I've never heard of anyone
mm,
studying how to be with someone during success in a way in the therapeutic realm. It's a really interesting and I think it's so important for guys, especially, to say, like, you're doing the thing. Like, I tell them
yeah,
that. I said, it's like, you are, this is, like, you are getting an A+ in therapy right now. Right?
yeah,
Like, awesome. And I don't try not to do it in like a terminally nice way that can be off-putting, because I want to do it in an authentic way. Again, back to the language piece. It's like, that is awesome how you just, like, explain that whole thing to me. Like, I am so happy for you, genuinely, and I mean that. And so just that is also something we don't see enough of in therapy. So, um, I just want to touch on that because it is so true.
mm.
We don't think enough about how to deal with success like that.
No, and that is a big issue that I think a lot of men don't really understand what therapy can be. And therapy is not one thing, it is infinite things. I don't work with any two clients the same. Um, but like I've said many times before, like if you watch the video of this and you see, me with my stupid hair and my earrings and my hoodie and think, I don't want to work with a guy who looks like that. And you, Jett, who looks much more, quote, professional than I do, and think, well, maybe you might be a better fit. But there is between me and you, there's everything and more, right?
Yes.
There is,
Yes.
and there are people out there who will work with you. And what would be your advice to a man who is thinking about therapy and is unsure where to start? And of course, tell them to go to Men's Therapy Hub. But when they are trying to genuinely look for a therapist, because one of the things Jett and I have agreed on very resolutely, Men's Therapy Hub is not about saying that men should only have a male therapist. We're not about saying that men can't or shouldn't work with a woman. We're not about saying that women can't be great therapists for men, because they can. We are purely about saying, here is a load of men who want to work with you as a man, as I said at the start. But let's say a man does come onto the Men's Therapy Hub directory. Like, my advice is go with the photo. Look at the photo. Does he look like a sort of guy you want to chat with? And then have a look to see if he sounds like someone you want to chat with, and then have as many calls as possible to figure out who you might want to work with. But what would your advice be to a man who is listening to this and thinking, all right, these two guys have kind of convinced me that maybe therapy isn't what I thought it might be.
Mm-hmm.
What's next?
Yeah, there's no getting around the trial and error aspect of it. I went through it myself. Um, you know, reach out to several different therapists. It's a visceral sense. Like you said, you look at the picture, you kind of get an overall gestalt of who this person might be just from the available information. And then you reach out, and, most of them are going to offer a consultation call, or first session. Everyone has a different style, and just take them, kind of round robin. Take 15 minutes, 20 minutes to talk to somebody, take 15 minutes and 20 minutes to talk to somebody else. And when you've spoken to about 2 or 3 or 4, it's not a science. It's saying, I feel a sense of comfort, psychological safety, however you want to phrase it, when I'm on the phone with this person. And you're not going to know the reasons why necessarily you connected with that therapist until later on. Oh, there's something reminiscent of, you know, uh, the big brother that I never had, or he sort of reminds me of this guy, or he sounds, like little things bring you closer to a therapist. A Men's Therapy Hub, they're all accredited, they're all trained properly, and so you can rest assured on that part. Um, the question is, like, just that visceral sense. Shop around, and by the way, therapists are used to doing consult calls and then having someone not, want to schedule a first therapy meeting with them. Like, that's okay.
Or
If you're a therapist,
having a few sessions and then them saying this isn't
that's
working
true
for me,
too.
or
That's right.
being ghosted.
You're right. Yes, this is not dating, although there are some similarities in terms of swiping across faces. So don't worry about, if you're the type of person who worries about other people's feelings, practice putting that away for a minute. Don't worry about the therapist's feelings, and just think about what you need at this point in your life. What would work? Um, there's a period in my life where I really felt like a male therapist was important to me. I found one. More recently, I was like, you know what? I think I could benefit from a female therapist, and that's what I found. So it's about choice. You're right. That's why I'm here with you. It's not that female therapists or male therapists or any gender is better than any other. It's that we have to give a sense of community around male therapists, and that therapy isn't, for one type of person or another type of person. We have to create a sense of, like, we're in this together. We are men who are trying to help men find male therapists, and there's nothing wrong with that. We want to make this available to you. Um, we we're trying to change the conversation. It's been, for the last, like, 50 plus years, women have done a brilliant job of organizing. Feminism has brought so many changes. They've been talking about women in work and life, and, there's brilliant books written, a lot of ink spilled about femininity and women. And now I think part of changing the conversation is not silencing them. It's saying, okay, now it's our turn as guys to step up to the plate, start to build community, start to talk about what it's like to be a man and masculinity and go into therapy. So we're creating a space to fill a void. And so I would say that that's my hope with this project. And I hope that if you're looking for a therapist, you find other therapists who are on board with that.
And that brings me, you and I have the ability to talk for a long time. And on
Yeah.
weeks where we either can't be bothered or we can't find somebody to join, you and I will jump on and do a quick 45-minute blitz on a topic. And I'm actually looking forward to those. So I'm going to wrap this up here
Hmm.
with our final question that I ask everybody. And you will ask also, you will ask me. So I need to think of my answer for this.
Hmm.
I am going to give you the keys to the vault. You have unlimited funds to do something in terms of bettering men's access to support, men's outcomes from support, something to improve the lives of the internal lives of men. Let's call it. What do you do? How do you do it?
I graduated college, and there was a period of time where I didn't know exactly which direction I was going to go. I joined something called AmeriCorps, which is a um, organization that basically puts you into different high need places in America. And for a year, you do national service, and in some domain that's of importance. I worked at an anti-poverty organization. I wrote grants. I was a good writer, so I was like, you know what? Let me lend that skill to an anti-poverty organization. So I wrote grants for an entire year. Um, you know, was it was the greatest experience? No, but it gave me, a young man, a sense, a source of meaning and fulfillment that I'm needed. Um, in a time in my life where I felt very disoriented. And I think for um, what I would do with that unlimited sum of money is I would focus it on young men, age range, whatever, 16 to 30 or 25. I don't have a, exact range. And I would say, let's help men in this really uncertain economy where the scripts of masculinity are getting ripped up, and there's no clear replacement. Let's give them something that this country or any country or the world needs, right? Men will rush to a place when they're needed. It's part of masculinity. Like, it's a trope. And so I think if I had the money, I would create a national service organization where it would help direct men towards project, like whether it's energy projects, healthcare, whatever the domain is, we would find a place for them in this economy where they are needed. I think California is actually starting to do that. The American Institute of Boys and Men are, helping out with, bringing a lot of great policy ideas to the table. So if you are interested, definitely go there and take a look. But I would use it towards a big, you are needed, with a finger pointing, kind of like back in World War, that sort of
Mm.
iconic symbol of World War II, but in the version of pointing towards young men, like, we need you, dude. Like, we need you to write grants. We need you to put out fires in dry climates. We need you on the front lines of putting up solar panels. I don't know. I don't care what it is. I think getting them out and out of their heads, off their computers, off our screens, and sort of into the world, into the engines of the economy, so to speak. That's what I would
Mhm.
do. I would. And am I the perfect person to run that organization? No, but that's where I'd funnel the money.
Mm. And the beauty of that is what you're tapping into is the kind of innate maleness, right? To say that there's nothing wrong with being productive. There's nothing wrong with showing courage to fight fires. There's
That's
nothing
right.
wrong with being brave and tough and strong. In fact, those are all wonderful traits.
Yep.
And one of the things that I do with my clients specifically is how can we harness those traits and point them in a direction that is not harmful to the self or others? And I love that. And it's why I like this question, because everyone's answer so far has been so different.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Jett. Again, thank you for coming on. Thank you for being a patsy for this through me so far, of being like, Jett, what do you think of this idea? So I'm not just a classic man on his own, because no man's an island, right? I'm a founder who found somebody to bounce ideas off,
Yes.
to share space with, and I really appreciate that. And I love how your mind works. And I think the more we talk, the more similar we're going to realize that we are, which maybe isn't great for two podcast hosts, but it's fine because we're not on it together very often. So,
Right.
I really appreciate it. And usually I'll ask people where they go to find you, but I mean, menstherapyhub.com, which is the US site. We're hoping that's going to be launching sometime in the new year. menstherapyhub.co.uk, which is the UK site, has launched today, November the 3rd, 2025. And I'm really grateful for those of you that have made it to the end of this podcast. I hope that you listen to the rest of them. I hope that you listen to all the ones this week. And I hope you either use our site yourself or point somebody in the direction of Men's Therapy Hub to say, hey, look, here's a load of men who want to work with you. Because that's what this is about. Jett and I are not in this to become millionaires. If we wanted to be millionaires, we wouldn't be therapists. We're in this because we want to help. And I really hope that in the long run that we can. So thank you, Jett. And I will speak to you again soon.
Thank you. It's been so much fun.
Thanks for listening to No Man's an Island. If you enjoyed this, please share, like, and subscribe so more people can join in the conversation. This podcast is powered by Men's Therapy Hub, where you'll find more resources, support, and a directory of male therapists for male clients. Don't forget to follow our Instagram and TikTok at Men's Therapy Hub. The music is by the Swedish artist Reindeer, spelled Raindear. Thanks for joining us. See you next time.